well. This is kind of that, I guess, that relationship to the environment I spoke of earlier, relationship to the landscape, the inside, the outside, how those spaces play off each other. Historical respect. So here's a new building next to a much older building. Different styles in some ways, but there's a lot of respect there, I think, and together they're kind of stronger for it, I think. Ideas of ritual and order, and that's kind of, I think that plays into the social aspect as well. It's like a strengthening cultural ideas. Composition. Feel this is, in a lot of ways, this is bringing together a lot of those ideas I've already spoken of. Bring them together in a great way that they all strengthen one another. And similarly, in interior space, you can see the materials there, a bit of perhaps playfulness, composition, light. And talking about just a couple of projects that I feel exemplify this. This is an example of repurposing a building, and this is where good design can actually kind of discover qualities that perhaps weren't there to start with. So this is in that this picture here. You're actually looking up the old ramp of an old car park building, which is probably not perhaps a fantastic space originally, but someone realised a vision and saw potential there and brought light in. And something that's really interesting, I think, is that this is a sloping space, and that's not something you would design in a cafe space on purpose, but there's something really interesting happening there, again, by realising the value of a space. And I really strongly feel that when you bring all these things together and create a quality space, you're also creating a space that has adaptability and ability to be reused and repurposed. And the importance of that is that when you reuse a building, you extend its life and you save all those materials from going to landfill. And there's when you get back to measuring things, we talk about the embodied energy and all those, but there's more than that too. We're talking about qualitative aspects. It's like the history and the stories that are in that building as well. I'm sure you recognise this, the Waterworks Building. So originally an industrial building, but it's been very successful in various roles since then. And this is a project by Via, and again, an older space with great qualities, and it's going to continue to be invested in. And I believe that's me.
I can advance mine.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of pick up where Nick left off on a number of these, but first I'm going to kind of touch back on this diagram. I think that it's really important when you're thinking about architecture to balance the many aspects of a project. There's a lot going on in any project, and it's not easy to say we have to be the lowest carbon possible, or zero electricity, or any of these one aspects, because you can throw the rest of the project kind of out of whack. You have to respect all of the systems. So I think about architecture as a series of systems. If you use systems thinking and you understand those systems working together, you have a better chance at kind of making a more sustainable whole. And by sustainable, I personally mean something that will continue its life for a longer time, something that you can continue in perpetuity, actually, without negative impacts in the future. This is, I think, a really important graphic, the way I understand the design process, and that is that the earlier you make a decision or you make a good choice about a project, the cheaper it is. And the easier it is to make a large impact. So as time moves forward in the design process, as you continue through, it gets more and more costly to make meaningful changes to your design that will impact the overall sustainability and quality of your project. Also, as you move forward in time, you have fewer and fewer abilities. The greatest impact that you can have on a project is actually the site that you choose for that project. Both the site you choose in terms of where you are in relationship to other cultural attributes, grocery stores, churches, neighbors, whatever is important to you, farmland, however it is that you organize your life, choosing where that project is very important. The other thing is the site itself. So this barn is basically what I consider to be the most perfectly sustainable building I've ever seen. All of the materials were probably used from that site, other than a few nails, if it was done with nails at all. So there's stone, there's wood. It was all probably from very close by. The old barns were even done with slate. It integrates into its landscape beautifully, and it uses the natural attributes of the landscape to do work. So these barns were built terraced for a very specific reason. It had to do with the workflow of what happened inside of them. So you could bring your hay in up top, you could shovel out the manure from down low. There was a kind of rhyme and reason to why these barns were put into slopes. So that site selection is critical to its function. When we think about homes, there's a kind of similar understanding of choosing a site and then working within it, depending on how you want to live. This is Glenn Murcutt, who's an Australian architect, who's one of my favorite. I think that this house is sited in a way that everything works together. So if you look at the materials and the scale and the way it's sited and the way it's oriented, you have a building that is kind of in touch with its siting. It's in a very specific place. There's a notion of how these people want to live within the forest. And then the building kind of reinforces that. And there are simple materials. So while, there's a lot of metal here that was not from this site, there's a lot of glass that's kind of a lot more manufactured. Using some of those same lessons in terms of looking at the siting and then reinforcing that with the construction. This is another project from Carusa St. John on the Isle of Wight. This is an old barn retrofit that I think they've done very sensitively. And again, there's a great understanding of site. So site doesn't only mean the landscape and the topography, but it also means the cultural site, the historical site. And there's a lot of, kind of as Nick pointed out, there's a lot of history and memory embedded in some of these buildings. And sometimes when you reinvest in these, a lot was already happening right there, and you can very elegantly kind of rehabilitate some of that space with a lot less work. When you rehabilitate that space, you're taking advantage of the embodied energy of what's already on that site, what has already been invested in the past, and you're able, for a much lower resource cost, whether it be time or money, you're able to kind of prolong the lifespan of that prior investment. So how do we do that moving forward? This is a model from via the Island Arts group up in Grand Isle, Great Hero area, where a donation of this barn, and there's a little shed there, was made to, and they want to make a performing arts center on it. So the first thing that we did in trying to understand this site, they said, oh, we want to do X, Y, and Z, and we said, okay, well, let's look at that site. And we started to look at the site as a whole and see what advantage was there. And this kind of gentle sloping of the site down towards the back of this barn, we said, well, that would be a beautiful performance space, and then you could make a natural amphitheater. And if you put a couple of your new buildings in to enclose that space, you can make an outdoor room. And so instead of having some idea, well, we have to build a building to have this performance space, we said, well, they're mostly up and running in the summer, so we're going to make this outside space a room of that, starting with the attributes that are already there and emphasizing them. This is a project that we did via the St. Albans State Office Building up in St. Albans, a very different site. There was a dilapidated building along this site. It's a very urban context. There's a lot of culture that comes with an urban context versus the more rural or agrarian context as well. And so we wanted to invest in, materials that were as local as possible, that would last as long as possible, and to kind of continue that urban frontage. So holding the street is really important in urban settings. You can see the way this building does. This one's much larger, but the town has aspirations for this kind of growth in other places. And actually one of the most important details on this building, you can barely see it, but down here there's granite along the bottom of the building. This was a very low budget building. That granite was incredibly important because they salt that sidewalk all the time. There's a lot of salt. And granite is one of the only materials that can handle that salt and the water and the ice over time. So when you look at old streetscapes and you see that granite, it's called a damp course for a reason. You can even see it wicking some of the water here. That granite damp course will preserve what that building looks like at the street level, at the pedestrian level, for a very, very long time. Concrete falls apart with salt. Most other stone falls apart with salt. So that was an incredibly important detail. Above there, some of this is precast concrete, this is brick. That won't take the abuse of the salt. So you have to understand kind of the systems. Again, it's the systems thinking of the site. Slade Hall up at UVM, this is another brick building. And I put this one in because part of this context and talking about sustainability, this is going to be a LEED Silver building. That was the mandate for the rehabilitation of this building. This is a historic photo, kind of as it is, and this is a drawing of what we might do on the south side. We're choosing not to insulate that brick because of sustainability. So while we're insulating the roof, we know how to insulate that roof in a way that we can preserve the roof. With the brick, the building science is very, very delicate around insulating brick, because that brick, the sustainability, the longevity of that brick, you have to let it breathe on both sides. So when that brick gets wet, it has to breathe again. Otherwise, freeze-thaw cycles it'll kind of dissolve. It'll tear itself apart. And so in this case, we're investing in new windows. It's hard to see, but this is actually a replacement window. These are the original windows with these awful storms. This is an exercise we're doing for State Historic Preservation to understand what it might look like with the replacement windows that we were choosing. And then by not insulating this brick, we know that this building will last another 100 years in place. Again, it comes back to the embodied energy of that building and wanting to preserve it moving forward. This is also a McKim, Mead & White building, famous architects from the 20s and 30s. So it has some kind of historical significance as well. So we really wanted to preserve it moving forward. This is another kind of way we think about sustainability. This is right here in Middlebury, over off of Weybridge Street. This was a very kind of typical looking ranch house when we started. And we invested a lot of time in kind of sensitive materials. But there's also another aspect that I wanted to talk about, and that is that of aging in place. So this is a couple in their 50s or 60s, and they want to be able to stay in this house that they're renovating for as long as possible. They're moving in from further out of town. They're downsizing into this house. And so you can see there's a ramp, a very gentle ramp that comes up to the front door here. You know, very typical in Vermont with good reason. There's a few stairs that come up to the front door, keep it up off the snow, up off the water. And so a big important part of this plan was to make sure that as they age and those stairs become more difficult, they have a very elegant way to enter that building. Again, when you look at the kind of embodied energy and the reuse of a building, we were able to bring this house up to a kind of wonderful contemporary look, but still have the traditional house. And this is just to talk about design constraints. This is a very, very small bathroom in the same house. And the client bought this sink, fell in love with the sink, bought the sink, and then we needed to figure out how to incorporate the sink in a very, very small bathroom. And sometimes those constraints, those existing constraints, all the systems that are in play can make a kind of lovely, unique setting. And so this little curve here was just because there was not enough room to put a full counter in the whole bathroom. And so the builder and Asher worked together on that to kind of find a solution to fit. And I think that that's a really good metaphor for learning how to work within systems that are existing, because there will always be constraints. This is another private residence that we did. I'm going to kind of move through a little more quickly. This one kind of has all the check boxes for kind of typical sustainability: foot-thick walls, cold climate heat pumps. There's no central heating system in the building. It's net zero ready. If they put a few solar panels on this building, it would be a net zero building. But to me, that is not actually the important part. The important part is how well it's sited, and that you're looking at a very good understanding of Vermont weather and Vermont patterns in terms of how water comes off of the building and snow comes off of the building, and how it's situated within the landscape. You know, one of the parts about sustainability that Nick was mentioning is there's this aspect of beauty and making something worth investing in. If you make something that is so special, people will invest in it in the future. And if you make kind of more of the status quo, there's no reason for people to invest in it. And so you will lose all of that previous investment and embodied energy. So one of the ways I like to think about sustainability is, this is a quote from Peter Zumthor, who's one of my favorite architects. He's Swiss. And this is the back of the Rochester Library that Nick showed you earlier. This is an addition that we did onto the historic library right in the downtown. Really, in this case, it was very important to understand the historical context, the historical form, the patterns of the village. And so a very traditional kind of massing, that's a very, typical New England massing of a way to extend a building. But when I think about sustainability, this is Peter Zumthor talking about how he thinks about design, and I think he's one of the best out there. And I started to notice that there's a real kind of parallel between this and the way that people like to talk about green design or sustainable design. So, the temperature of space, the sound of space, the material compatibility, a lot of the things that we've talked about already. Again, making that building lovely so it's worth reinvesting in. Kind of similar image that Nick had of the interior of that same space. And when I kind of start to look at the composure and seduction, or the levels of intimacy, or the way that light works in that space, I get a really good sense of why the town chose to reinvest in this space. We've made, this space ready for the next 100 years. And my guess is that 100 years from now, people will reinvest in it again because it's such a lovely space. When I look at the kind of body of Via's work, this is just a snapshot of our website. These are from the residential work that we do. There's a lot of different challenges depending on the different sites. And the most important part to me of sustainability is understanding that site, understanding that context, and working within it to address the specific challenges that that specific project puts in front of you. And that's where I think design is so important, and not just looking at the technique or the technical aspects of the project, but looking at the cultural and emotional systems that happen within every project as well.
So I will be talking about the third kind of element of our idea of what sustainability is, and that is the social aspect. When we think about sustainability, you can think about individualistic elements, such as making your house net zero or reducing your carbon footprint. But the effort of pushing sustainability is much more of a communal act, whether it's a local community or a global community. And so what exactly are the components of community, and why are they important in the push for sustainability? Nick and Sam both mentioned culture and history, and so those are very important aspects to consider when thinking about the future as well. So what has happened and what has given this place an identity will continue to do so in the future. And so it's important to acknowledge those and integrate those as well. This touches on the third aspect, economy, and it ties very closely in with this communal effort. It's kind of recirculating. If you put effort into a local economy, the community and that economy will therefore give back to you. You can see that in the farmers market that's happening as we speak in town. Local farmers from the area will go contribute to it, other people will buy, and it establishes a communal effort. And then also other important aspects of this culture and identity of place is to make sure the people of this group feel healthy, happy, and safe. If they feel this way, they will want to be part of and continue growing this place. So I have I wanted to show you this project. I think it epitomizes some of the ideas of communal effort and sustainability really well. This is one of our projects. We're working with Bristol Co-Housing. There's a group of probably 13 families that are coming together, and the idea is that they share responsibilities. Not only are the houses and the buildings net zero and energy efficient, but the social culture is as well. So whether they need a weed whacker, they share it. So not 12 need to be purchased, but one does, and they share it. They will share meals and share each other's lives. So you'll know the children next door, and it's really a communal and group effort to push that. These are just some of the plans. Also, I mean, you can see in this project, some of the buildings are new construction, and so we are able to make them very efficient, but some of the buildings on the project are renovations and retrofits as well. The community house, which the group is shown pictured in front of here, this is an amazing historical house on the site. And so they've decided to make that their heart of their community. And so it just goes to show how much the history and the culture of place plays into that. We want to end on one of our recent projects that was finished. We think it really epitomizes each of the components that we spoke about. So delight and beauty and design, history and context, and the social aspects. So it's sited properly. It takes advantage of the site. It's in the downtown. As you can see in some of these pictures, they're somewhat hard to see, but it also was, it took advantage of an existing building, a very important historic building in town, but it has an addition with a new energy efficient addition. And it represents a community as a whole. It's a place where people come together, they share their knowledge, and as a whole, they can, push and give what they know and can learn to their future generations. Thank you.
I'll just give you a couple more little pointed talking points about this one. So this is the existing Jane's house, and there actually was a barn there that was almost this size. It was just a little bit shorter, and that part was removed because it was nothing special. It was really in poor shape. And so there was a place where it seemed like actually removing that was going to make the project more sustainable. It was going to last longer into the future. This is this very peculiar old house that's mostly brick. It was absolutely wonderful. Most of the windows remained, some were restored. This part was more of a kind of renovation, historical renovation. Oh, yeah, so this is that existing, this is what was kept of the existing. This was kind of, we respected the history by replacing essentially the massing, but we made it a little bigger. And then we also architecturally really designated what was historical and what was new. So we didn't try and make this look like the one that used to be there. This is a new building, and we wanted to make that clear. So it uses a similar palette and a similar color scheme in both. And then this is the new library. This is entirely new. This faces south, so you get a lot of wonderful southern exposure. This building is also net zero ready, meaning if they put solar panels across the top of this, they could be a net zero for this portion of the building. The existing portion of the building, that was never going to be possible. It's just a really complicated, you can see all the nooks and crannies. We did a lot of work air sealing and doing energy upgrades where it was going to be feasible. But again, you see where some of this brick is, left that alone. We put a bunch of new insulation within some of these wood framed walls where it was easy. We re-insulated up in the roof where it was easy, but in other spaces where we were going to have to compromise that kind of historical integrity, we actually left it alone or just made more minor modifications. Then you can also see architecturally this very clear kind of architectural move to say this is where new starts. We wanted to kind of be very clear, and so that the building reads a little bit in terms of what is old and what is new, and helping the community kind of understand some of those decisions we made. I think, yeah, go ahead.
I think it might help to just end on the diagram.
Again. I think when we were talking about putting this presentation together, we came across this diagram. You'll see it in different forms in different kind of books about sustainable design, and it's very frustrating for. I'll just speak for myself, that this is really, it's like this and this are what's talked about all the time, and this. Or sometimes in other circles, this is talked about all the time. Or in other circles, this is talked about all the time. And to understand how many forces come to play in this discussion, in order to end up here, there's a lot of types of sustainability, and a really good project requires establishing your goals more clearly. Instead of using the more blanket term sustainability, talking about what your goals around sustainability are. Is it low carbon? Is it low electricity usage? Is it being off the grid? Is it a more equitable society or a more equitable project, one that will last in the kind of social and economic spheres? So kind of using this as a way to understand your goals and kind of be a little bit more clear about what your goals are can be a great benefit to a project at the earliest stages of design, because it can help kind of make a roadmap through the thousands of decisions as you go.
And just one other point kind of on that is kind of realizing that achieving this is actually going to be a balance of all those three, and by nature perhaps a little bit of a compromise. You may not achieve the ultimate environmental goal or the ultimate economic goal or the ultimate social goal, but by balancing them all, you're actually achieving something greater. That's us.
Thanks.